Hello, chess friends, and welcome to Zarov's Chess Channel, and welcome to the Clutch Chess International Tournament in 2020. It's again a Jeffery Xiong versus Magnus Carlsen. Jeffery Xiong surprised Magnus Carlsen, I think, in the round 7, get a win, so now the result is equal. In the 8 game, Magnus Carlsen only got a draw, but now in round 9, it was Magnus Carlsen's time maybe to show some skills, because I don't think that he was satisfied with this outcome of this games so far. So then after that, we'll have also the 10th game, which is also evaluated 1 point for the win, but then again in the 11th and 12th game, we will have this clutch games in which you can get 3 points for the win. So now it doesn't even matter if you win these 2 next games. These clutch games are so important, so that's why we'll have some dynamic battles between the 2 top grandmasters. But let's see now this game from round 9, in which Jeffery Xiong again played with the white pieces and opened with the move e4. So we have Magnus played now c5. After knight to f3, we have d6. After d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to f6, knight to c3. So far, the 3 knights variation, and now we have a6, the Najdorf. And the Najdorf is always fun to watch. We have bishop to d3, and now Magnus transposes into sort of dragon Sicilian, because Jeffery Xiong didn't play maybe the most natural move, f3, bishop to e3, queen to d2. Here Magnus uses this moment to open this dark square diagonal. There is this problem about this knight on d4, because you play the move bishop to d3. The knight is a little bit loose on the board, so far, after the move bishop to g7, there could be some discoveries by the bishop on the knight, for instance, if this knight moves. So that's why here f3 now played. After bishop to g7, we have bishop to e3. Still an unclear position, of course. It's still this opening stage, but I sometimes don't like this setup of bishops when you play bishop to d3, bishop to e3. Still, this knight is loosed a little bit on the board, so that's why Magnus challenges the knight, knight to c6, again with some discovered attack possibilities, maybe knight to d7, knight takes e4, if the position allows it. So far, it's not possible, because bishop takes e4 will happen, and still we would have a protection on d4. But in long terms, maybe if white gets a little bit deflected, then maybe there are some tactical possibilities. Queen to d2, and we have bishop to d7 played by Magnus, and now queenside castling. So Jeffery finishes his development, which is very good so far. Black has now the opportunity to maybe challenge white with the potential b5 moves, and we have now this common opposite side attack game, in which black will make progress on the queen side, white will try to make progress on the king side, maybe with g4, h4 moves, h5 moves, in order to crack the position after potential castling. But here Magnus plays a very interesting idea. He delays the castling situation. He stays with the king in the center, because there is one problem in chess always. When you attack the king side, like here with the g4, h4 moves, then it's hard to attack the center also. So staying with the king in the center sometimes can be a strategic element, of course. After rook to c8, we have knight to c6, played by Xiong, and we have rook takes c6, played by Magnus. He opens the c file, still with the king in the center, so that's why Jeffery plays the move bishop to h6. He basically forces now Magnus to do something. Either you castle into the attack, or you trade off the bishop. So you don't have other choices. So that's why Magnus first takes. Bishop takes h6. After queen takes h6, we have now a common or similar position, which most of the times you see maybe in the Perch defense, in which, okay, the queen is here, but the problem is you cannot attack the rook here on g7. Then you get rook to g8, and everything is protected. The queen has to retreat to h6. But after the move rook to g8, then basically you showed your cards. You cannot castle anymore if you play with a rook, of course. And here Magnus plays a very, very dangerous idea. He plays a rook sacrifice, rook takes c3, which basically is not the best of moves. It seems that it, of course, weakening the pawn structure in front of the king. But here, white is better after this rook takes c3, b takes c3, queen to a5, attacking the pawn on c3, and now king to d2, which was a good move by Jeffery Xiong. We don't care basically about this a2 pawn. We want to hang on to our pawn on c3. Still, this king, although in the center, it's very well protected by this bishop and these 2 pawns, so no checks are possible. And the problem for black here is that you cannot improve the position of the knight. The knight doesn't have good squares to come into the game. The d7 square is covered, the e8 square is covered, and even if you manage to find a way somehow with this knight into the game, then again this threat is possible. Queen to g7. Then if rook to f8, we could simply take this pawn, maybe h4, h5 ideas to create sort of a pawn pass pawn situation. So I'm not sure why Magnus went to this line. It's really not good. If White plays this game very correctly, White has a comfortable game, I think. In the game, Magnus improves the position of the bishop to c6, with ideas to maybe cement the knight and here to play something like knight to d7, knight to c5, because the only piece that has sort of a flexibility in black's game here is the knight on f6. It can only support the queen here in the attack. The rook is of course far away from the action, and the bishop is blocked out by this central pawn structure. So as I said, the only flexible piece on the board is the knight. So h4 played by Magnus with this common idea to create this flank attack. We have queen takes a2 played by Magnus. Pardon me, this was played by Jeffery, of course. H4. We have rook to b1 by Jeffery. He's trying to do something here on the b file, but it's again everything is well protected. Even for White, it's not so clear how to find a way into the game, because the rooks are far away from the action. The center is closed, the files are closed, so the rooks of course love open files. So far we don't have any files open at all. So here Magnus tried queen to a3, improving the position of the queen, trying maybe some queen to c5, maybe queen to c5, maybe queen to f2 ideas to get the queen somehow into the game. In the game, queen to e3. Here Jeffery prevents this idea, and now queen to a5. We have a g4. Jeffery is continuing to push, and we have a knight to d7. Here rook to a1, attacking the queen, queen to c5, and now f4. This is a very good move, I think, by Jeffery, because you don't want to have so many pawns on light squares as you have the light square bishop. You need to bring some pieces, so you need to bring some pawns on dark squares, maybe try some g5 moves, and then to crack the position on the h file, because I think the h file is the only file where you could find a way to get your rooks into the game. So that's why this f4 move is perfectly fine. And now Magnus closes the dark squares. Very important positional move, because now you see this bishop is not so good. It's blocked out by its own pawn. So that's why you have to close the dark squares with the move e5. Very nice positional move by Magnus. So if you put this position into an engine, it will show you that White is much better, but it's really hard to play this game as you don't find a way to get this rook into the game. You cannot find a way to get your bishop into the game. Here, after the move e5, Jeffery tried queen takes c5, and we have now a d takes c5. What Magnus would love to do here, that White simply takes, but then you would have a blockade with knight to e5 and then followed with f6. This knight on e5 would be perfectly fine. It couldn't be attacked by any minor piece. So this is probably a position that Magnus Carlsen would love to play now, and then maybe to improve the position of the king, maybe even castling if the position allows, because here without the queens on the board, a flank attack is not so dangerous anymore, because if we have the queens on the board, then of course a flank attack with the queen and the rook battery maybe could cause even some checkmate threats. But now without the queens on the board, it's really a hard position also for White here to play. In the game, rook to f1 was played, so not this move, f takes e5. Rook to f1, we're trying simply to open somewhere the position. In the game, king to e7 played by Magnus, and we have rook to a5. H6, we have finally this move f takes e5, and now knight takes e5. I think Magnus can be satisfied now with his position. Okay, here Jeffery can take another pawn, but if we evaluate now the position from piece activity, here we have a double pawn. So we have a 2 versus 2 situation here on the queen side. Nothing can happen basically on the queen side so far. We have a 3 versus 3 position on the king side, which isn't a problem also for Magnus. But the main problem is that this rook cannot go into the game somehow. The rook is basically out of game. I really like this knight on e5. Here Magnus tried knight takes g4 with still possibilities to get the knight back somehow, maybe f6 and then a knight to e5 to get his knight back on a very nice square. Here e5, that's why here Jeffery Xiong prevents this idea. He wants to keep this knight out of the game, and now rook to d8 played by Magnus, simply playing on this very nice pin on the d file. This bishop is still bad, but it can be improved. Of course, first you have to get your king out of the way. Rook to f4. Here Jeffery finds finally a way to get this rook into the game, and now h5 cementing the knight. Very nice move by Magnus. Okay, what to do now from White's perspective? Basically, the position on the king side is splashed. You have now a 2 versus 3 situation, so pushing pawns is not a possibility here. So the only way to get something is to maybe create a fast attack on the b file. So there are maybe some tactical possibilities here in the game. Rook to d4 played by Jeffery Xiong. He tries to simplify the position to trade off the rooks. If that happens, then he would have 2 centralized pawns, so that's why Magnus gets out of the way. Rook to e8, then we have now bishop to a6. Very nice move by Jeffery, deflecting here the pawn from the defense of the bishop, and if that happens, then White would have a clear path. We would have a pass pawn, which is very good to create in such positions, because here Magnus tried to keep the position compact, but now it's not so clear what to do here in the game. We have king to f8 was played, and now bishop to b5, which wasn't really the best of moves here by Jeffery. Maybe rook to b4 is much better. Again, with the same ideas, to simply take bishop takes b7, or after b takes a6, to take this bishop and still secure sort of a pass pawn situation. You need to create here a pass pawn in order to win this endgame. If you don't do that, it's not a winning game here for White. That's the problem. Here in the game, bishop to b5 was played, and Magnus simply takes another pawn. We have bishop takes c6, but now after b takes c6, again, you see Jeffery didn't secure a pass pawn because Magnus gets out of the way. So here I think Jeffery had this opportunity to play maybe a better move, rook to b4, here really challenging. That was maybe his best move, but here he allowed Magnus to get somehow into the game. Here after b takes c6, Magnus has again a compact position, again with possibilities to play the move f6, cementing the knight in the center, protecting our pawn on c6, and I think this is a drawish position. So, but in the game, rook to e4 played by Jeffery, brave decision to play now on a win. I think he wants to win this game. He wants to crush Magnus Carlsen. I really like Jeffery's confidence here against Magnus Carlsen, because I've seen many times that players are simply too scared to play against Magnus. They lose in winning positions. But here Jeffery shows a confidence, but sometimes confidence can be also your main problem. Here after the move rook to e4, f6, as I said by Magnus, cementing simply the knight, and now king to e3, king to f7, now king to f4. We have rook to a8, rook takes e5, played by Jeffery, which wasn't the best of moves. You should really stay and keep a compact position. Try to maybe just play some perpetuals with your rooks. This is really a draw. But rook takes e5, and rook after f takes e5, king takes e5. Okay, we have now a new position in which the pawns are equal. But still, Magnus Carlsen has here the opportunity to maybe create a pass pawn, although you have a 2 versus 1 situation, but these are double pawns, so it's not easy here to create a pass pawn situation for Jeffery. Here, after the move rook to e8 with a check, we have king to f4, rook to e6, and now c4. We have rook to f6, attacking the king, king to e4, and now king to g7. Here, Magnus tries a different way, maybe king to h6, and then g5. Finally to get his pawn rolling here on the h file. And in the game, rook to e5 was played, and now rook to f1, getting behind this rook, behind this king. The main idea now by Magnus is to create a distant pass pawn. If you play a bad move like maybe a c5, here is the problem of this position. You get simply a rook to e1, and after trades of rooks, you could after the move king takes e5, we could simply play the move g5. After a takes g5, here White would be always a little bit stuck to the defense of this potential promotion on the h file. White will get deflected by this pawn, and now maybe Magnus could go after this pawn, and then also after this pawn. But in the game, after the move rook to f1, Jeffery tried king to d4. try to get this king somehow maybe to c5 and grab this pawn, creating a new pass pawn. But Magnus simply plays this very nice check. We have king to e4, and after rook takes e4, it's basically a lost game. After king takes e4, now comes this idea to play the move king to f6. After king to f4, we have now c5, getting a tempo. c3 has to be played, and now g5 played by Magnus. Very, very nice endgame technique by the world champion. As we know, he's really the best endgame player. The problem is that after h takes g5, we have the move king to g6 with a similar idea that I've explained now. You cannot protect anymore this pawn. You have to play something like king to g3. We can get this pawn, but then after that go after these two pawns, creating a new pass pawn situation. As I said, white is always deflected to the defense of this potential promotion on the h-file, and in this position Jeffery resigns. So okay, what to say? Jeffery missed some opportunities here, but nothing is lost. As we know, we have still this one game that's evaluated 1 point, and then we'll have these 2 clutch games that are evaluated 3 points. So even if Jeffery loses this next game, still he has opportunities to win the match game against Magnus Carlsen. If you want to see more games between the two of them, I've analyzed so far 3 games. Here is the link, and if you want to watch maybe the best chess games that have been ever played in chess history, you can also check out my best chess games of all time series, and you can also subscribe to my channel if you like this content. Thank you for watching, guys, and chess is the best, of course.